Let me begin with something very important. Many students fear academic research projects, not because research itself is difficult, but because they do not clearly understand how to begin Chapter 1. And that beginning, in most university and research institutions, is Chapter 1, like I said. Chapter 1 is the foundation of an academic research project. It is where you introduce the study, explain the problem you want to investigate, and show why your research is important to knowledge, society, or professional practice. In simple terms, Chapter 1 answers one powerful question, like, what exactly is this research about, and why should anyone care? If Chapter 1 is weak, the entire project becomes unstable. But when Chapter 1 is clear, structured, and logically developed, the rest of the research process becomes significantly easier. So, today in this episode of Research Hub and Academic Mentorship, we will carefully walk through what Chapter 1 really means in an academic research project, the standard sections that make up Chapter 1, how each section should be written, common mistakes students make, and practical guidance to help you write Chapter 1 confidently. Whether you are an undergraduate student, a postgraduate researcher, or someone preparing for a final year project, this lesson will help you understand how academic research actually begins. Let us begin. In academic research writing, a project is typically structured into 5 major chapters. These chapters include Chapter 1, that is your introduction, Chapter 2, literature review, Chapter 3, research methodology, Chapter 4, data presentation and analysis, Chapter 5, summary, conclusion, and recommendations. Among all these chapters, Chapter 1 plays a special role, as it introduces the research, it establishes the problem that requires investigation, it defines the purpose and direction of the study. Think of Chapter 1 as the intellectual doorway into your research project. When a reader, whether it's professor, examiner, or professor, opens your research, Chapter 1 is the first place they encounter your thinking. And in that Chapter 1, they are quietly asking themselves, does this student understand the problem being studied? Is the research meaningful? Is the investigation logically structured? A well-written Chapter 1 immediately signals academic seriousness. In most university and academic research projects, Chapter 1 contains several important sections. This typically includes background to the study, statement of the problem, objectives of the study, research questions, research hypotheses, that is in quantitative studies, significance of the study, scope of the study, operational definition of terms. Each of these sections perform a specific intellectual function. Let us examine them carefully. The background to the study is the first major section of Chapter 1. This section explains the general context of the research problem. It gradually introduces the reader to the issue being studied. A good background to the study moves from broad ideas to specific issues. For example, imagine a student is researching the impact of social media usage on academic performance among undergraduate students in Abuja. The background might begin by discussing the increasing role of digital communication in modern society, the rise of social media platforms among young people, the integration of technology into learning environments. After establishing this broader context, the discussion gradually narrows to how students use social media daily, concerns raised by educators about distraction and reduced academic focus, the need to investigate whether social media usage affects academic outcomes. This movement from general discussion to specific research focus helps readers understand the environment in which the problem exists. The background should not be storytelling without direction. It should rather logically guide the reader towards the research problem. The statement of the problem is one of the most critical parts of Chapter 1. This section explains the specific issue that requires investigation. In other words, it answers the question, what exactly is wrong? What exactly is unclear? Or what exactly is insufficiently understood that this research seeks to address? A strong problem statement normally includes evidence that the issue exists, a clear description of the concern, and a gap in existing knowledge or practice. For example, if students are spending many hours daily on social media, educators may wonder whether this behavior is influencing academic performance. If existing studies show mixed results, or if the logic or the local context has not been sufficiently studied, then a research gap exists. Your research project then attempts to fill that gap. The problem statement therefore justifies why the study must be conducted. Without a clear problem, research becomes meaningless. Once the research problem has been identified, the next step is to define what the study intends to achieve. This is the role of the objectives of the study. Objectives describe the specific goals the research aims to accomplish. There are usually two types: general objectives and specific objectives. General objectives state the overall purpose of the research. For example, to examine the impact of social media usage on academic performance among undergraduate students. Then the specific objectives tries to break the general objectives into smaller investigative steps. For example, 1. To examine the extent of social media usage among undergraduate students. Example 2. To determine the relationship between social media usage and academic performance. And then you have to identify whether excessive social media engagement affects students' study habits. Specific objectives help guide data collection and analysis later in the research process. Another thing you find in Chapter 1 is research questions. Research questions translate the objectives into questions the study seeks to answer. They guide the direction of investigation. For example, how frequently do undergraduate students use social media platforms? What relationship exists before or between social media usage and academic performance? Does high engagement with social media affect students' study habits? I want you to know that research questions help ensure that the research remain focused and systematic. In qualitative research, researchers may formulate hypotheses. A hypothesis is a testable statement predicting the relationship between variables. For example, social media usage has no significant relationship with academic performance among undergraduate students. This type of hypothesis is called a null hypothesis. Statistical analysis later tests whether this statement can be rejected. I want you to know that not all studies require hypotheses. Qualitative studies usually do not include them. And then in the chapter 1, you still have significance of the study. The significance of the study explains who will benefit from the research and how they benefit. I would like to use the same issue raised to cite example in this case. So here you have a study on social media and academic performance might benefit students in a way that it helps them understand how digital habits influence learning. And then another benefactor of this can be educators, because they guide policies on technology used in education. Another beneficiary can be researcher, because your work in this case is going to contribute to existing academic literature. Then another beneficiary will be institution itself, because your research is going to inform academic support strategy. This section highlights the value of the research project. Another part that needs emphasis in chapter 1 is the scope of the study. The scope of the study defines the boundaries of the research. It usually clarifies the population studied, the location of the study, the variables examined, and the time frame of the research. For example, this study focused on undergraduate students in selected university in Abuja and examined the relationship between social media usage and academic performance. Defining scope helps ensure that the research remains manageable and realistic. Another section you find in chapter 1 is operational definition of terms. This is the final section of chapter 1, and this section explains the specific meaning of key terms used in the research. For example, social media. The researcher may need to define what social media is. And in this case, you would say social media is a digital platform used for online communication and information sharing. And then you cite another point, and which can be academic performance. You define that as students' measurable educational outcome, such as grades or cumulative grade point average. Defining terms prevents misunderstanding and ensures clarity. Now, let me quickly share with you common mistakes students make. Many students struggle with chapter 1 because they make avoidable mistakes. Some of these mistakes include writing background sections without logical direction, presenting weak or unclear problem statements, writing objectives that do not match research questions, ignoring the research variables identified in their topic, including unnecessary information that are unrelated to the problem or to the research problem. Know that academic writing requires clarity, structure, and relevance, and every section must serve a purpose. Dear students, Chapter 1 is not just an introduction, it is the intellectual foundation of an academic research project. When Chapter 1 is clearly written, the purpose of the research becomes obvious. The investigation becomes structured. The remaining chapters become easier to develop. Take time to build Chapter 1 carefully, because in research, a strong beginning often determines the strength of the entire work. In our next episode of Research Hub and Academic Mentorship, we will move deeper into academic research writing by exploring how to write a powerful literature review in Chapter 2. Until then, remain curious, remain structured, and remember, great research is not written in confusion. It is rather built step by step. Thanks for being with us on this, and see you again in our next episode. Thank you.